Several major local criminal cases have made their way through Texoma courts in the last few years. But for most, that's not where the story ended, after a number of defendants appealed the judgment of the trial court. Josh Hoggard has been keeping up with these cases as they've worked their way through the appeal process, and he joins us now with several updates. So Josh, what's the latest?
Yeah, Carney, you're absolutely right. The end of the trial is not always the end of the case, with many defendants choosing to appeal those convictions and sentences. And that starts with filing a notice of an intent to appeal, and 2 defendants recently convicted in Wichita County have done just that. First, 65-year-old Michael Lloyd Carlson, the former Knox County sheriff, who was convicted back in April of manslaughter and sentenced to 10 years in prison, stemming from his role in a 2023 wreck that claimed the life of a nearly 2-year-old child outside of Electra. Carlson's attorney filed notice last week of his intent to appeal with the 2nd Court of Appeals in Fort Worth. Also filing a notice of an appeal, U.S. Army veteran Anthony Keeneland, convicted last month of attempted capital murder of a peace officer, pleading guilty to 16 counts of aggravated assault of a public servant. He was sentenced to 30 years for attempted capital murder, 10 years for each of the ag assault charges, all stemming from a standoff outside his home on Turkey Ranch Road. Now, one Texoma defendant that has ended his appeal case before it ever got started, Knox City father Brian Johnson, who was convicted back in February for criminally negligent homicide and child endangerment related to the fatal shooting of his 1-year-old daughter. He had filed notice that he intended to appeal that conviction. However, court documents show his attorney has filed a motion for that appeal to be dismissed. Now, once an appeal attempt is filed, the defendant will file a brief explaining why they're appealing. Then the prosecution files a brief in rebuttal, both eventually submitted to the appeal court justices. And well over a year after briefs were filed by both the defendant and the prosecution, one of the more gruesome cases in Wichita County's history will finally go before the justices of the appellate court. Corey Allen Trimble was found guilty of capital murder by a jury in August 2023 for the horrific death of 11-year-old Logan Klein, whose body was found in an abandoned car more than 5 years ago. Now, that appeal case has been in limbo since April of last year, but now the First Court of Appeals in Houston set the briefs to be submitted to the appellate justices next Wednesday on June 25th, where they'll determine whether or not to affirm the court's conviction or reverse the conviction and remand the case for a new trial. And of course, this isn't the end of the story there. The last-ditch effort for defendants, if their judgment is affirmed, is to request a review from the highest criminal court in the state, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Now, 2 local defendants have filed their petitions for a discretionary review. That's Stephen Douglas, who is once again asking for a review following his 20-year sentence for manslaughter in a fatal crash, as well as Bradford Thompson, convicted of murder in Wilbarger County and sentenced to life in prison for the fatal shooting of Andre Sandoval. And speaking of discretionary reviews, another major appeal case that we're following is that of James Staley, whose conviction for the murder of 2-year-old Wilder McDaniel was reversed on appeal. And we're still waiting on the highest court in Texas to decide whether it will indeed review that case after the Wichita County DA's office filed their petition and the state's prosecuting attorney filed a letter in support of the discretionary review, something that rarely ever happens. Now, of course, we'll keep you updated on all of that and all the other appeal cases pending in Texoma on air and on our website, Texomashomepage.com.
All right, we'll be looking forward to those updates. I know a lot of people will be interested to see how those pan out. Josh, thank you so much for that update.